YouTube app just crashed again. So let me pull my channel up so I can see if people are coming in, if I need to kill this and start all over again. I really wish that the YouTube would sort of get the app situation resolved. Golly, what a pain in the butt. All right, a few guys are coming in, so I guess it didn't completely crash. All right. Sorry, I just tried to go live and then the app crashed, and apparently it's working now. So I was trying to pull up a couple of quick pieces of data here I want to cover on this live feed. While I'm doing this, I think I can do this and talk at the same time. Title of this video is Somebody's About to Get Hurt. And so this morning, Kyle leaves the house. He's heading to baseball workouts and then to work. He's gone, I don't know, a few minutes. And he says, he calls me, he says, "Hey Dad, I'm on the 10, Interstate 10. All right, that's probably where you should be. Right, but I got into an accident. Are you okay? I'm fine. What happened? Long story short, guy in front of me slams on the brakes, goes to the left lane, comes back to our lane, and then tries to go back to the left lane again. And by then, I ran into the back of him. So less than 6 months, which look, he's, yeah, less than 6 months he's had his license. So I don't know what the over-under was. Whatever it was, I was hoping it was definitely going to be over. So nobody got hurt. That's the good thing. Frustrating thing is the gentleman in the car, right? So the dent, he probably hit the guy going about 10 miles an hour. So says the officer. The dent's like the size of a dollar bill, and I talked to Kyle. This was sort of that learning, that opportunity for a life lesson. And the life lesson has to do with not just driving cars when you're 16 years old, or 56, or personally or professionally, right? So we sort of talked about it. And now one of my two criticisms about Kyle and his driving has been he drives too fast, which he comes by that really honest, right? I don't drive slow. But I'm not a fan of driving too close, and that's the other argument. And what I was explaining to Kyle was this. Life is, as it relates to sort of this accident and life, business or personally, life is about this. No, Kyle's not 56. It's all about options and giving yourself outs, right? That's what it's about. And so I said, in this particular case, son, probably giving yourself one extra second. He hit the dent on this other individual's truck is probably the size of a dollar bill. Unfortunately, it's going to cost a lot more than $1 to fix. Just bent a little small section of the bumper. Had he just been following 1 second farther away, and then here's the thing. This individual said, "Look, I've got to call the police. This is my company truck, and so I had to have a police report." And so I sort of called the guy and I said, "Hey, I think that you don't have to, right? Can we get out of that?" No. So he calls the cops. Officer comes. I was appreciative of the officer, although look, this is ultimately Kyle's fault, right? But the officer sort of said, "Look," and Kyle had me on the phone when the officer showed up. The officer said, "Look, it's clearly less than $1,000 worth of damage. You could just exchange insurance and it would have been all fine." The guy said, "Look, I have to turn this on the insurance." And the officer said, "Well, actually, no, you don't. But by calling me, I now have to give this young man a ticket." And he'd already asked Kyle, he said, "What are you doing? Where are you going?" Kyle says, "I'm going to practice," and didn't go to work. And the officer said, "Do you pay for the car?" He said, "No, I don't pay for the car, but I do pay for my insurance, I pay for my gas." And so the officer sort of sort of talked to the guy. He says, look, I've got to get the kid a ticket, this and that. It's going to be an expensive lesson for Kyle because, as I explained to Kyle, not only are we going to have to pay to have this fixed, but you just gave yourself no options, right? No options whatsoever. And when you give yourself no options, whether it's driving a car, whether it's getting just average grades in school, all these life choices that we make, we sort of prevent ourselves from having more options. More options are typically a good thing because when bad things happen, options give us the opportunity to adjust, correct, all those sorts of things. So a couple of weeks back, I did a video and I talked about rates, and I said, hey, look, you should expect rates to take a noticeable dip, somewhere in that sort of 15 to 20% range. And here we are, we're in the midst of that dip. Literally a week or a week and a half later, all of a sudden everybody's on these Facebook forums and they're crying foul, saying, oh my gosh, right, the sky is falling, the sky is falling. I can't believe these brokers, these idiot shippers. How dare them look at these rates? Nobody's gonna haul this freight for this rate. Oh, hey man, sorry, Howard. I guess it's before bedtime. So it happened, and it shouldn't be a shock, but here's the thing. For a lot of those individuals that are migrating to the lease op or the owner op space over the past several months, this is their first time that they've experienced a July and August. Understand this, freight in late June and really early July, meaning before the 4th, really spikes significantly. It's all about getting a lot of product in the stores before the 4th of July. After the 4th, man, there's usually a dip, right? Maybe not so much that immediate next week, but certainly soon thereafter. This year, it tended to come a little bit sooner than previously. But nevertheless, we are in the midst of this dip. And I have seen, what's interesting about this is the number of emails that I receive has spiked significantly as rates have dropped. And so sort of what that would imply to me, and this is just an assumption, is guys are really curious about the finances for their business as it relates to, to their truck and their business. And so I thought I'd spend a few minutes tonight and talk about some of the numbers. So if you track a lot of the trends, or if you track a lot of the trends, then you are aware of this. If you don't track a lot of the data that rolls up to provide rates or the trends for rates, then I'll spend a few minutes tonight and discuss this. So, if you understand this, if you understand sort of the way the market works, right? A lot of the spot market freight exists simply because of other carriers are rejecting tendered loads, right? And so by tendered loads, we mean a carrier has a contract with a direct shipper, and that shipper offers them a load at a particular rate. If they don't want that load because of whatever reason, potentially a rate, they reject that, right? They reject that load. I don't want it. And if they can't get covered by the other carriers that they have contracted, it ends up on the spot market, right? Just as a really high-level, simple way to explain this. So there are metrics that track the outbound tender rejections, okay? And there's an index for that. So what we saw, back early July, very early July and late June, where the number of rejections were really pretty significant. What we have seen since then is the spot market rates are not nearly as strong, and so we see a lot of carriers accepting those rates that they have from existing contracts. And so when we look at the outbound tender rejections, that has now began. So it's really been in a significant decline, all right, over the past several weeks. It's now flattened out. Okay, so that's a good thing. Now the hope or the intent is that it begins to creep up. I wouldn't expect it to really be creeping up for any noticeable amount until we get sort of towards the back half of August. So we've got a few more weeks of this. But there's a couple of other metrics that I think are really interesting. When you look at some of the stuff that's over, some of the capacity over in the ports, capacity is off by about 20%. So, you know, that's interesting. I think a lot of that has to do, or the speculation is, of course, that a lot of that has to do with the tariffs. You know, prices increased for some of those products to come in from overseas, and so that's having kind of a noticeable impact as well. But that's interesting. 20% is a really significant number, right? A really significant number. I think the good news overall is that the expectations are for the remainder of 2018 that the spot market should hold really strong, right? That's the projections. One of the key indicators I think that a lot of different economists tend to look at are the housing starts. And then if you go all the way back to 2014, what you see is that there's been a noticeable trend up. That trend has been significantly greater over the past couple of years. But the important thing is that over the near term, sort of a more acute look at this or micro view of this, is that the housing starts continue to trend upward. And that's a really positive thing, I think, for the shipping and transportation sector as a whole. With that comes all the products and things that are associated with housing development and things of that nature. And it just tends to show that the market here in the economy here in the U.S. is trending in a very positive manner. And so we can tend to expect a lot of the other industries to be pretty strong as well. Again, boding well for 2018 for trucking and transportation. Where are things really hot right now? So I was booking some loads last week, and so I look at a lot of this data when I try to make decisions on where we're going to try to send somebody. We have a driver delivering tomorrow in Little Rock. There's a reason. Little Rock, that area around Little Rock, within probably 100, 150 miles, is really hot. So if you are looking to make money, and I'm specifically referring to the reefer market. So if you haul reefer and you're looking for some really strong rates, Little Rock is probably one of the best places in the country for that. It's the second best place. The first, or the best place, I should say, for strongest rates are going to be in the southwest portion of Texas. Those two regions for reefer freight, hands down by far, show the best rates in the market right now. There are certainly other areas that it's strong, and typically, if you want to look at the map, what you'll see is probably the strongest or best areas tend to be sort of from that Wisconsin, Michigan, Chicago area, kind of down south to Texas. Certainly relative to Texas, southwest portion of Texas, hottest market that we have going on right now in the industry. Little Rock is the second strongest, and that's for today. So if you watch this video, you know, 5 days from now or next week, you know, all bets are off, right? But for right now, this short period of time, that's sort of where you want to be. If you look at the national averages for what we're seeing for the OTRI, right, the outbound tender rejections index, you're going to see over the past couple of days, I think going back to the 16th or the 18th, one of those two, the trends are really, really flat. Again, flat's not good, except in this particular case, we would perceive it to be good because it's flattened out over the last couple of days. Prior to that, we've seen a really significant drop last week, right? And so that the indexes certainly show that. So the fact that the rejections are anticipated to start to, or at least remain flat, that's a good thing. What does all this mean, though, relative to your business? Well, ultimately, when you take a peek at, and oh, by the way, let me just jump on DAT. I'm not a particularly big fan of DAT. I think their numbers, I struggle to see. Clearly, DAT has a lot of data, and if you follow the trend lines for DAT, I think I'm going to get this right. They typically throw out the top 25% of the rates and the bottom 25% of the rates, and what they try to give you is the meat in the middle, right? Sort of the mean average. And if that's the case, I just don't tend to see that the rates that DAT shows relative to the broker to spot market, I just struggle to see that those rates are particularly accurate. I tend to believe they're about 20 cents higher than what most individuals are seeing. That's just my opinion based on what I see us booking, as well as what I talk to other individuals and see what they're booking. Having said that, fuel did drop just a touch. It got to $3.25 was the highest it got to. That was a couple of days ago. It's now dropped down to $3.23, I think. Yeah, $3.23. Still pretty significant. What that I think ultimately means is with the spike in fuel being significant and the drop in rates being significant, guys are not in nearly as strong as a position as they were just a month ago, right? Or 6 weeks ago. And so what does that ultimately mean? That ultimately means that you need to be managing your business really well. If you're one of those individuals that says, I've just got to go make revenue, you stand to lose a pretty significant amount of money over this 6 week window, typically a 6 week window, right? Late July through the majority of August. So it sort of gets back to knowing your cost per mile. I haven't really talked about cost per mile for a while. I know that a lot of you guys are probably really sad and you miss these cost per mile talks. So we'll bring it up. Understand that cost per mile is a really good component for measuring and tracking your profitability. If you don't know what your costs are, you can't determine what your profitability is, right? At least not in a short time frame. If you're that individual that says, I want to run for a really long period of time, and then I want to try to catch up and run my numbers, it's a really sketchy way to run your business for the simple fact that you could be running at a loss during times like this when we see these 6 week windows. The average individual lease operator or owner operator is probably going to run somewhere in that 8,000 to 12,000 miles over a month. And if you're running at a loss for 6 to 7 weeks, that can hit you in the pocketbook in a way that you're probably not a particularly big fan of. So give yourself options, knowing what your costs are, knowing what this data suggests, knowing that Southwest Texas is the hottest place in the country, knowing that Little Rock is the second best, and looking at that data, tracking this data, comparing it to what you're seeing on load boards. When you do enough of that, you tend to be able to make more right guesses, giving yourself more options, right? It's that way when somebody slams on the brakes in front of you, you don't just hit them, right? Having all that negative effect of lost time, you get a ticket, insurance is going to spike, you may or may not have this opportunity to pay them, right? They may turn it on insurance because that's just the way that they want to do things. I had all those conversations with Kyle today, and yes, I did have the conversation with Kyle is that, hey, look, by giving up all of your control and losing all the options that you had prior to following too close, now you're in a situation where you just have to hope. You have to hope that this person doesn't call the police. Guess what? He did. You have to hope that the officer doesn't give you a ticket. Of course he was going to, and he did. And now you have to hope that this company will allow you to pay for this damage out of your pocket. That's still to be determined. I didn't make that phone call for Kyle. I made Kyle call that company. Now I did talk with him. We did role play for a few minutes on the phone. But I made Kyle make that phone call to the company and leave a voicemail. Hopefully he's going to get a call back tomorrow and be able to bring that to resolution. He's got to go to court to determine, I guess, what his fine's going to be. I have to attend court with him since he's under 18 so that he can ask for permission, I suppose. I didn't realize that's the case in Arizona. To go to driving school. That's going to cost money. A whole lot of expense here, and as I explained to him, hope is a really crappy business plan. And that's what he's up against, right? He's doing a lot of hoping, all because he didn't prepare in advance for this bad thing happening. If you're not preparing in advance for your business, for when bad things happen like this, you're putting yourself in a really bad situation. The exact same situation. I mean, literally, think about this. Here's my analogy. You're running your business like a 16-year-old is driving too close to the vehicle in front of him. And that's just foolish, right? And anybody that watches this that's in the transportation industry knows following too closely is just a really stupid thing to do. I hope that my 16-year-old son now knows that as well. But it's up to you to prepare in advance, know your costs, and be able to apply just really basic reasoning relative to your business and make some really good decisions. So that's sort of the update. Things are still looking pretty sketchy. I'm really curious to see what things look like as we get to probably Friday this week. I'm kind of curious to see if anything changes. I really don't expect anything to change, although I would begin to expect we see maybe just a little bit of bump up in the rates. The other thing that a lot of individuals can face is there are still some really good rates that are out there. And but it's going to be up to you to pound those phones, make those phone calls, sell your value, and try to get a reasonable rate compared to what you're seeing in the market. It just means more work, more effort on your behalf. Bear with me. Let's see. And let me pull this. Let me pull my page up, and I'll try to address a couple of questions. Sketchy is the word of the night. Is that right, Food Mooch? Food, I saw some of your comments that you had made earlier. I was going to respond, but obviously that didn't work out. Zach, you sent me an email. All right, I'll take a peek at that. Charlie, Ken, Sugar Shine, welcome. Crazy night. Dixie Fellow, how are you? Archie Davenport, Jim, Food. Oh, hello, Oklahoma Dave, Jim. And now my computer wants to, there we go. I was getting the beach ball of death. So I'm just curious if you guys are seeing some of the same rates are strong sort of in the Midwest. Chicago is not a bad place either to get some freight out of. Howard's in here. Greg Emmon, welcome. Joseph Harding. So glad I don't make videos so nobody knows me. Yeah, there's some truth to that, no doubt, no doubt. Dan says, what's the difference between trucking and distribution price-wise? I'm not sure what you're asking there, Dan. Can you be just a touch more specific? That's sort of that could mean a couple different things. Thomas, good evening. Let's see. Man, Food, did I miss some? I missed some of the sketchy? I must have missed it. Yeah, Allison, I did know that you were, that was a whole different debacle with the airbag, and that obviously didn't work out like we'd hoped. Having to sit because we couldn't find an airbag for a trailer. Let's see. Food Mooch, he wears Skechers. That's sketchy, yeah, you bet. Benjamin Juke, just my issue. I update the numbers on the 34-hour reset. I simply don't have the time to run and make the deadlines. With a year or two of data, you can see the week cycle, month cycle, and season. Yeah, you can, but you know what? Here's the other thing, though, Benjamin. When you run, that's, I think, the challenge for a lot of the lease operators or owner operators that are sort of new to the space. When you're a company driver, I think you're just focused on driving the truck, right? And doing those sorts of things, watching YouTube videos, that sort of nonsense, not paying attention to maybe the level of details that you should pay attention to. When you get into that lease op space or the owner op space, all of a sudden, you are now tasked with, or at least monitoring those that are tasked with booking loads for you, finding the right lanes, the right runs, the right rates, all those sorts of things. And that's where it does take some time to really get your arms around where do I want to be, where do I want to position my truck, trying to find good areas to get to so that you can maybe end up in one of those hot areas. Maybe you can't get a run directly in there, or you can, but it's at a pretty crappy rate. Maybe you're better off stepping yourself to, you want to be in the hot market, but maybe you just don't go directly there. Maybe you got to step yourself to another location and get a little better rate going in there. So there's just a whole lot. There are a lot of plays or pieces to this puzzle, right? And it's up to you or those that work for you to make those right decisions to get you there profitably. And yes, Howard, you're absolutely right, man. You got to watch fuel spend, right? When it's almost 3 1/4 a gallon, that hits really, really hard. But Benjamin, you can absolutely find a lot of this data online. So if you're not familiar, you don't know, there's a lot of places where you can find some of this hardcore data. You can start digging into it and understanding where you want to be at what time. Nick Markham, I just ran Hammond, Louisiana to Baytown, Houston back to New Orleans for 1,800. Not bad, dry van. Good stuff. Tucker Eric, who's getting hurt? Or how, you said how's getting hurt. I'm assuming you meant who. Probably those that don't know their costs or don't know what the rates are and where to be. Jules Verne, I suspect that's probably you, not me, bud. Jonathan Bearden, good evening, man. How are you? See, Benjamin says, glad it's okay if you don't understand or know what to look for, as in problems, it's hard to prepare for it. You're absolutely right, and that's some of the stuff that I spent a fair amount of time with Kyle trying to explain, is you're giving yourself options and really anticipating what bad things can happen and what you're going to do to avoid that. Again, a lot of that comes with experience, and when you're 16, you've been driving for 6 months, you just don't have that. Oh man, gosh, Greg, that's a great question. List of websites to read on a weekly basis to stay ahead of the trends. I spend time on the load boards. I spend time on, golly, what are some of the websites I look at? It's one of those situations where I go to them all the time and I don't even think of what they are. I look at a lot of different data. I look at a lot of analysts' data and what their projections are. I look at trucking trends. I look at freight, where it's coming at. A lot of the sonar stuff I track really closely, that kind of stuff. So it's just a lot of different locations that I sort of just bring it all in and just sort of grind on it, and it kind of just logically spits out sort of where you want to be and where you don't want to be. Maybe that would probably be worth a good video to pull together all the specific different sites that I look at to kind of come up with some of that stuff. Food Mooch says Kalamazoo's hot. Yeah, Freight Waves is a good one too. That's a really good one. Yep, there's some stuff. Then they touch on they do touch on a lot of the sonar stuff as well. In fact, I think it was theirs. I think it might have been their stuff where I was looking at some of the housing reports and comparing it to some of the other stuff that I find elsewhere. And so those two numbers tend to mesh. Some of the sonar stuff that they have, I think, is really good. The thing to be careful though about the Freight Waves is they don't work off. They work off of metrics, not necessarily percentages, and so you can get pretty confused if you're looking at some of that stuff. You see like a really big swing, and you look over and you think, man, that must be a huge swing, and in fact, it's like 0.5%. And so I think you need to spend some time to really understand that. And if you're not a numbers guy, some of those videos can just be ridiculously, horribly long and painful. But just a ridiculous amount of data there. It's sort of like any software program. Spend some time to understand it, look at it, dissect it, and you can kind of work your way around it. But there is a tremendous amount of data on the Freight Wave stuff. And what will happen is you'll get to working your way around sort of a few key metrics versus trying to just look at this massive amount of data. Alex Express, nobody got hurt yet, unless you don't know what your cost per mile is. That's sort of what we're talking about. Barb, Kyle was presented with a huge learning opportunity today. Man, and I sort of talked about that this morning with him, Barb. It was just like, gosh. For somebody, he's been driving for a lot longer than just now. Right, when we go back to Oklahoma, rural America, right, spends a lot of time driving on the farm or dirt roads or those kinds of things. So he's got a lot more experience than maybe the average 16-year-old, which is sort of the reason I'm a little bit more disappointed in the decision that he made to follow so closely. But again, that's sort of a bad habit that he's had since getting his license. And I told him, I've told him all the time, almost every time I'm with him, I'm like, this is going to bite you in the ass, and it did, and he acknowledged that. Larry Jr., a YouTube star. Scott, how do you like the new house? How long till the pool is done? Pool's done. I was in it just a little while ago, actually, with the dogs. I'm still waiting on the guys. It's the backyard's sort of 99% done. I'm just waiting on the guys I've got one large 6x6, 12-foot tall post to put in, and hang a few cafe lights from that, and then some low voltage lighting, and then it's done. But it's pretty much done. I don't like the house. It's okay. You know, it's good. It's cozy. 100. By the way, here's totally random. So I went out. I went out early this morning, like really early, like 5 o'clock or so. And I don't think I went out again. I don't think I'd let the dogs out until like 1 or 2 this afternoon. I opened the sliding glass door. There was a really nice breeze, about 10-mile-an-hour breeze. My house faces west, and the breeze was sort of coming out of the west. I opened the sliding glass door to let the dogs out. And you guys know that feeling when you're cooking something in the oven and you pull the oven door open, and that just rush of heat singes your eyelashes, your eyebrows, and all that sort of stuff. That's what I experienced. So today was the hottest day that I've experienced since I've been here. It was 116 outside, and that breeze just felt like a furnace. It was sort of stupid. At some point when it gets like really hot or hotter, today was pretty warm, I'll break out like eggs in the frying pan, and I'll make eggs outside on the, well, I'll do those videos. Well, and that's the thing, Greg, that's sort of what I was talking about, right? Well, you said they can't be comprehensive. It's not, right? That's not the one-stop shop by no means. Let me, like I said, I'll pull this together and I'll shoot you a call or do a video on it. The problem with freightways, again, is there is a wicked amount of data, and you really have to know sort of where to step. Otherwise, you're going to be just lost in data hell. Freight was good in Chicago. Yeah, it has been it has been pretty decent the past couple of weeks actually, and it's better. And right now it's still better than average. But again, it's sort of in that sweet spot, at least for reefer. Right, I should clarify. It's in that sweet spot for reefer. You know, the sweet spot right now is kind of Chicago. You know, east and west. I guess east and west, probably more east than anything. A couple hundred miles down towards Texas. Ingrown toenail. Are we hiring drivers for Bellflower? Yeah, we're always hiring. And in fact, I need to post another video. Actually, I want to try to grow the few more company drivers. So we probably are looking at 4 or 5. Please don't troll me. He doesn't deserve it. Alex Express, hit the like button, share. Let's see, Jacob the Breeze. You need to be nice. Everybody needs to be nice. Greg Inman, Jim J, chess doesn't work well. You're thinking 10 moves ahead, and they changed the board on move 4. And that's a really good analogy, right? This market can change so quickly, right? I think that's the thing that's been so surprising for Dave Wilbur, is how he can try to position a truck, and he may take 2 steps to get that truck to the location that he wants. And if those 2 steps aren't particularly quick, if they're maybe 2 longer runs, a lot of times by the time he gets that truck to where he thought he wanted to be, it's changed. And so it's taxing. It is. Yeah, that's why I do think that there is a lot of value to whether it's the dispatch service or the companies that are providing lease type services where they're doing dispatching and they have individuals that are just constantly constantly watching the changing trends and rates. I think there's a lot of value to that, and I would love to see data, and I'm sure nobody does it. I would love to see data of a company that has a really good dispatch service, or individuals that are dispatching or looking at loads, booking loads, and compare those to somebody that runs really similar areas but tries to do it on their own. I just don't know how, again, if they're just running the spot market, I don't know how the individual that is doing it on their own could be more successful at the end of the year from a revenue standpoint. Again, but you've got to have, all things have to be equal. Costs, you know, just too many factors that have to be too similar. Benjamin Duke, a chat on the websites would be helpful. Either idea of what you're looking for to take away from the information. 1, 2, 3 and DAT trend lines is about it for a single or a few truck operators. Yeah, 1, 2, 3 is, I'm not a particularly big fan of that. DAT I think is comprehensive. I just sort of tend to believe that their numbers are about 20 cents higher than really what you're probably going to average seeing. Again, that's just from my experience. Little Viking, it's really funny that you make that comment because I was in the pool earlier and chlorine's still just a touch strong, and I was going to do a live feed and I was like, man, I bet your Little Viking coach is going to make fun of me whining about it. As it turns out, Ike was on a marathon live feed, and so I was just trying to be polite and respectful and not do it then. So I waited until he was done, and so now my eyes aren't quite as red. Mr. Corona, hey man, how are you? Where are we located? I am in Phoenix, Arizona. Our company's based out of a kind of a suburb, if you will, of Kansas City, Missouri. Where are you located out of, man? Griggerman, I need to find a lane hunter. Have 2 lanes covered, need the 3rd one. To make magic happen. You're trying to build a little triangle. Kevin Hansen, your 30-second opinion on dry van market originating in Grand Rapids, Michigan, within 500 miles length of haul. So we haven't really ran our dry vans yet. Let me see if I can take a quick peek really quick. Bear with me. See if I can pull this up. What did you say? Let me go jump back. What did you say, Michigan? I think Michigan, Grand Rapids. Let's see if we can do this real time and not kill the mood. So let's see here. Man, this is going to take me this is going to take me more than just a couple of seconds to just glance at it. Let me see what I see on the national average. Let me go one other place. Kevin, it's I don't know what's going on. Maybe it's Wi-Fi. Maybe the internet is broke. It's pulling up really slowly, so I can't pull it up nearly as quickly as I want. So I'll have to get back to you, man. Sorry about that. I'll take care. Picto, hey, how's it going? Greg Goodman, yeah, you got so much cheesecake. Let's see, new to your channel, where are you out of? I'm in Phoenix, or suburb of Phoenix. Our company's based out of Kansas City-ish. There you go, Food Mooch. There's your answer, Kevin, probably. I think Food lives somewhere around Chicago, so he's probably pretty familiar with that. Man, the trolls are out tonight, huh? Nathaniel, it's all right, you can report me. Nathaniel, go crazy, bud. Neighbors, good stuff, man. And it's Gordon, brokers are scum. They take more than they give to the driver twofold. I don't know that I agree with that, Nancy. I mean, look, I've been really critical of brokers. They provide a service. So let's delineate really quick when we say brokers. And there's a lot more than this, but let's just make it really simple. You sort of have those brokers that sit at their kitchen table, in their underwear, and they're trying to schlep freight. And then you have those brokers that are probably spending a fair amount of time, effort, money, and energy trying to secure quality customers, things of that nature. They're not looking to double broker. They're not looking to do a lot of really sketchy stuff. There are some pretty significant costs to running that brokerage, not dissimilar from you running a truck. So those that just have this perception that those guys can just have a laptop and a cell phone, and they have really minimal costs, that's just not true, right? Not saying that some don't, So clearly some do. Just as, some carriers go and buy, a 15-year-old truck that's a piece of crap that's worn out and a really crappy, used trailer from wherever, Swift, and, they call themselves a carrier. So it goes both ways, but they certainly provide a service. It's up to you or me or the rest of us to try to find the best rate and negotiate the best rates. But again, I liken them to sort of a Match.com. And if you're in the market or you're looking for, good freight options, there's value there. There really is. Are we wanting to pay for that value or give up as much as as they sometimes take? Of course not, right? We always want to make more, and we think that we're worth more. And the argument's certainly made, well, if they're making the same amount of money that carriers are making, carriers are the ones doing the hard work, spending the nights away from home and families and birthdays and anniversaries and things of that nature, right? But again, we have that option to go direct and find those direct customers. So I don't think all brokers fall in that category. I don't know that all are scum. But it does. Here's where I will agree with you. The scummy ones are it's like they found a new low for scum, right? I mean, the scummy ones just are really scummy. The good ones can be really good. There you go, Kevin. Kevin, he's probably he's probably a good place for you to connect. You bet. What do I think about a full maintenance 6-year lease? So I guess it depends on the truck, the rate, what you're paying for that full maintenance lease, right? You're going to pay some percentage, and that's going to be reflected in typically two things. One is going to be your rate that you pay for the monthly fee, as well as the cents per mile. And so, depending on what those numbers look like, it could be a good deal. If you're someone that doesn't want to end up with a truck and you want to turn it in, that's probably fine. I guess the one argument that I would make is when you get past that probably 4-year mark, right? If you're an average lease guy that's going to run 100,000 miles a year, maybe a touch less, you're going to be at that period where that truck is going to be experiencing downtime. Now, in this particular case, you got 2 more years of downtime that you can expect maintenance items and things to break and that sort of stuff. If you're fine with that, then okay. If you're wanting to buy that truck out after that time, man, you're going to be in a bit of a sketchy situation potentially. I think the other thing is if you're running 120,000 miles a year and you're going to be doing that for 6 years, oh man, I don't know, right? Now you're back into that same situation as a lot of us are in, or Kyle is in, and you're sort of into that hope scenario. You're hoping that truck is going to behave well. So 6 years is a long time, right? It's a long time, and in this industry, that's a lot of miles, right? And I think the other thing to be considerate of is right now rates are really good, and how long a rate's going to be this good. 6 years again is a long time. So I guess the other way to look at that, last thing I'll say to this is if you look at your costs of operations for that truck and the interest you're going to pay over 6 years, for the full maintenance lease, you could probably buy a brand new truck with a warranty for a full year less than that, and have maybe 5 years of warranty. And so at that point, you're a year ahead, or maybe depending on how long rates stay strong, you could potentially pay that truck off 2 years ahead of time. And so you could be stuffing a lot more cash into your pocket, having that vehicle that's paid off. So there's a lot of angles to look at that. I know that sounds like a really simple question, but there's a lot and I could probably spend another 10 minutes going on different angles. So there's just a lot to look at. Kevin Hansen says, let's see some basic questions on that market as I prepare to run under my own authority. So Kevin, as I talk about a lot, right, I think one of the most important, maybe you've already chose dry van, where you're at, if you're in that Chicago area, probably not a horrible place, probably not a horrible lane to be dry van, but just consider where you're at, what type of freight is hot for the majority of the year, that sort of stuff. So consider that and understand your lanes really, really well, and because they do change. Kevin, Foodwitch might not be comfortable giving his email out, but I have his email out, and I'm completely comfortable giving out. So would you like for me to give it to you? I'm just kidding, Food. I wouldn't do that to you. Jim says, can it be that a full maintenance lease has an owner op paying way too much money for 11 grand a year extra for no discernible value? So I do think there is some discernible value, Jim. I just think, each individual has to decide whether or not it's worth it. Look, there is a tremendous amount of value, in my opinion, there's a tremendous amount of value for knowing, quite simply, that you're gonna have a fixed set of costs, right? So when you get it, and which is not so much the concern in years 1, 2, and 3, but in years 4 and 5, that could be rather significant, right? Especially when you're dealing with DPF and DEF issues. So I think that safety net, which is exactly what it is, it's just basically nothing different than insurance. You're just paying it sort of up front and as you go, versus risking it on the back end where you may or may not have kind of the cash flow to to really pay for that. So I think there is a discernible difference, but I think it sort of plays into that. Some leases do put a cap on, well, most leases do put a cap on miles, right, Greg? I mean, it should be a lot cheaper if you're gonna run that truck 75,000 miles versus 100 versus 120. A lot of companies won't allow you to go north of 120, right? So if you're a guy that wants to run really, really hard for really extended periods of time, then Greg, you're a good example of that. I mean, you can put yourself in a bit of a bind, right? So, and then that lease would certainly not benefit you unless you know what the residual value is, which, again, there's going to be a residual value. You'll see that early on in the appendices of the contract. But, again, if you're doing that long-term lease right now today, residual values are really high for used trucks. But you're going to be paying a high residual value based on, value today, when what that's going to look like in 6 years or 5 years is a big difference. Alex Express, well, thanks, buddy. I appreciate that. You're welcome for the insight. I spoke to someone at Fitzgerald Gliders. They're having some sort of a meeting on the 31st. They said they'd get back to me then on whether or not they'll be building more gliders. I did a couple videos on that. Obviously, I'm assuming that's why you're bringing it up. And man, it just wouldn't surprise. Again, my take on that is, if you're a glider company, I mean, look, I know they've got several different facilities and that sort of stuff. Somebody asked me the other day, what are they going to do? I have no idea. I haven't spoke to them in a couple of weeks. Probably actually closer to about 5 or 6 weeks, actually. But so I don't know what their plans are. I don't know if their plans are to just abandon the gliders altogether and start, using their retail facilities for selling their trucks. I have no idea what it's going to be. I think the glider push is just, it's so ambiguous, it's so vague, and I think it's just sketchy. Let's see. Mr. Cronin, the conversation about rates and sonar was intriguing. Sounds good. There's certainly a lot deeper dive that we can go into that. Legendary trucker message was deleted. I got it. Ghost Rider, what about reefer out of Indy? That's good. You're not going to get hurt out of Indy. It's pretty decent there. The other thing that you can do is you can find one of those really short, 200-mile runs. It's going to pay you $800 or $1,000 to bump over to Chicago. Let's see, last week I was looking at one. It was a 220-mile run, paid $1,000 over to Chicago, and just put us right in the dead center of Chicago. I mean, almost in the dead center of Chicago. We were 15 miles outside of town in a great rate, right? So, that load picked middle of the day, delivered early the next morning, and you were able to get underneath another load out of Chicago early the next morning, take your 10-hour break, and then you're good. So Indiana's a good place, especially for reefer. Hope that helps. Little button coach, I think Jeffrey likes the full lease because he does short hauls and says right now the lease company is in the hole because they aren't making lots of money from mileage. Well, and there could be some value to that, right? But again, I mean, if Jeff knows that he's going to be running short mileage, he's not going to pay more for, you know, say 120,000 miles or 100,000 miles. I don't know how many miles he runs. So they should know up front that he's going to be running short mileage. If he hedged that he was going to be running longer mileage, he's just paying more up front, and so that doesn't make a lot of sense. So it's kind of a balance, right? It really is. I can tell you, we had a driver a year or 2 years ago. Went over in like November. I mean, he ran really hard that year. He went over in November, and we pay less than 6 cents a mile, and I think his overage was like 19 cents a mile. I mean, it was something ridiculous, right? And so I was sort of begging him to take vacation. Legendary Trucker, you're watching me. Well, good for you, man. Maybe you'll learn something. Yeah, and that's sort of the thing, food, right? That's why I mean, there is a safety net. Again, it's just nothing more than really insurance on the full maintenance leases, right? That's really all it is. The downside is you have downtime, right? And so I think that's just one of the things that individuals need to look at is they're going to have downtime, right, as well. And so which way do you want to hedge that bet? For us, full maintenance leases were a good way to go, but from a cash flow standpoint, right? It made a lot of sense for us. Just because it makes sense for us or Jeffrey Like or somebody else, I don't believe it's the right thing for everyone, right? I just don't. Nancy Gordon, I used to run for long times. Now you have to have ELDs, right? Well, you do have to have ELDs if your truck is, is newer than 2,000. But again, and Nancy, I don't think ELD is really the issue, right? Unless you're just like running crazy cowboy. ELD is not the issue. It really is more about the hours of service. But you're right, there's certainly more flexibility on paper. Let's see, Mark Storm reports the 2016 Peterbilt 400,000 miles started throwing codes. Peterbilt doesn't know how to fix it. He's selling his truck. That, I can't imagine how frustrating that would be, especially on something as new as the 2016. Glider shops are screwed, kind of like the small carriers with the ODs. I don't think small carriers are screwed with the ODs. I mean, we had a lot of people that were saying, oh my gosh, we're gonna be killed because we run flowers. There are things that benefited us that don't benefit others. Again, ag exemption being an example of that. But I don't think small carriers are really going to get killed by the ELDs. And I say that because, was it last year? I was dispatching, Lana was on vacation. I was dispatching a driver. We did just a touch over 4,000 miles. And that particular driver was the one that ran an ELD for us. And so we did 4,000 miles. Now, did stars align? And did the dispatcher just do a hell of a job? Yes, but again, it took stars aligning. It took quick loads and quick unloads. That is the thing that we're seeing that's different now versus last year, which is we're not seeing as quick of loads and unloads. So you're welcome, Alex. Thanks, man. 29, have I used it 29 times? Let's just make it a sketchy. That's sketchy that you count that. There's 31. It's sketchy that I'm drinking wine. I don't drink wine all that often. It's a whole story that I'm not going to get into of why I have an open bottle of wine. Let's see. He said the other day a lease company wanted him and a new truck because they were losing money on him. Possibly, right? I would tend to guess. So here's the thing. If a salesperson is talking, that typically means they're lying. My guess is there's probably value. His truck has low enough miles on it that it's probably more valuable for them to sell it right now because good trucks are in pretty high demand. I don't know what kind of truck he drives, but quite possibly they do want him in there. Maybe they did a bad deal. Who knows? It's strange. I can't imagine that they're screaming that loud about it. That's crazy, but okay. I mean, again, especially if with a full maintenance lease, I mean, their cost. I mean, I guess they're assuming that he's going to be running a lot more miles, and certainly the mileage adds up. And I don't know what his mileage rate was. Maybe he was incredibly clever and negotiated some sort of a staggered mileage, meaning if he runs this many miles a year, then it's at this rate, or if he runs this many, it's a significantly higher rate. That would be really atypical for a full maintenance lease. You typically don't have multiple layers of staging. You typically have sort of one number, right? It's this number until you reach your lease number, and then it's that number over, right? There's typically not stair steps, right? Other than there's just those two numbers. So I don't know what his deal looks like, but that's crazy if they are really feeling like they're losing that much money. One thing that has me continuously looking towards a glider is the pre-LD motor. Seems like a lot of the changes or restrictions disappear. They do, right? I mean, let's be honest. You're not having to pay. So I ran these numbers here a few months back as we were looking into them. You're going to average about $5,000 or $6,000 for DEF. You're going to average maybe a little bit, maybe a touch less in fuel economy. I mean, for a lot of guys, I mean, some of the guys are saying they're getting, 9s in their trucks. About the only guys that I really have seen consistently are guys that are running Freightliners. The Volvos, even with the I-shifts, I think they talk a really big game, and we just haven't seen the numbers. Having said that, we don't have our gear ratios set perfect for hauling outside freight. And again, we do a lot of multi-stop runs. Even though it's light freight, we're doing multi-stop, many loads a day, many stops a day, excuse me. So I realize that we're not the best suited, and because we run multi-stop and light freight for flower season, we have our trucks geared to try to find that happy balance between OTR, and that happy balance means that we're not getting the best fuel mileage when we run heavier freight OTR. So there are some advantages. Obviously, running paper logs, if you see an advantage to that, great. So there are some things. I think there's some downsides to that as well, meaning you're going to pay a little bit less for that truck, $20,000, $30,000. But what happens if the EPA, uses the power of the pen, changes the law? I mean, they've done it twice now in the past month, right? They said, hey, just kidding, you guys can go and build more gliders. And then 2 weeks later, an environmental group sued the EPA. And the EPA said, hey, just kidding, stop, you're back to 300. So that $30,000, I think, is I think you're risking a lot more just to save $20,000 or $30,000. I think $20,000 to $30,000 relative to that risk over 5 years of your business is pretty minimal, right? You're talking $6,000, $7,000 a month, or excuse me, a year. So I just feel like right now there's just a lot of ambiguity. I don't see any level of specificity coming out of the EPA whatsoever. I just think it's food mooch. I think it's sketchy. I think it'd be a sketchy deal. I couldn't pull the trigger and make that decision right now. Greg, I think that's a really great point. I was having that conversation the last couple of days with some of our drivers relative to trip planning. That's something that we need to be much, much better at. And we're working with some of our drivers to really improve that skill set because it is so critical. And I cannot express the value in trip planning. The cost savings that go into that good habit are really extensive. So I agree. I think trip planning is a big deal. There are a lot of issues. There are a lot of lease. Sorry, Benjamin, let me try to read this. There are a lot of lease on companies that you want to run and make their numbers. So you just over broke. You're at just over broke. They make most of the profit, and you have all the bills and responsibility. Yes, I mean, I talk about this often, right? If you are going to lease on with a company, the worst thing that you can do is lease onto a company and essentially be forced to run their freight, right? Not be able to book outside freight and that sort of thing, because at that point, and I don't mean any disrespect to this, because I think at some point drivers realize this. At that point, essentially all that you are is a company driver who just has assumed 100% of the risk for that company. I mean, when you cannot choose your loads, right? I mean, you might be able to say, no, I don't want to take that load, right? But they're going to wait 2 days from now or until your name comes back up on the list, and they're going to give you another load that is their freight. To me, that is the absolute worst risk to take as a lease operator. It just is, because you have 100% of the risk, and you're sort of at their mercy for whether or not you're going to be successful or not. And I don't know many individuals. In fact, I don't know that I know any individuals who are in that model of a lease that have been successful. I'm sure that there are some. I've just never met one. They're sort of like a unicorn. You've got to be able to move your own freight, and you've got to truly be in a non-forced dispatch arena to be most successful. Let's see what else we got going. Let me just jump down to the bottom. Sorry. Let me jump way down. I know I'm kind of getting long. This is, oh God, this is really long. Let's see. Barb says, I think perhaps even a bigger risk is set price per mile leases. Man, you're probably right, Barb. I probably stand corrected. I overlook that one all the time, and I don't know why I do. And every time I think about it, I just sort of agree with you. If you're in that company that says there's going to be a set price, I've heard individuals have those conversations with me, and they try to sell me just like the company sold them on these set rates, and I don't buy it for a second. I just think it's a really, really bad deal. So I think it's right up there. You bet. Trucker Rick, so welcome, and I just don't want my live feeds to go over an hour anymore. Here we are, 2.5 minutes over it. I'm gonna kill it. Welcome. I'm sorry that you're late, or I'm sorry that I started early, one of those two. But anyways, just a question or two, and then we're gonna get out of here. Little Viking says, isn't the RST model of a company, they get dispatched by Prime? I'm not totally familiar with that model. Little Viking, I do believe, from what I've heard, I believe you're right, but again, I don't know that that's factually correct. I just sort of hearsay. Nancy says that lease operators are homeless individuals shoved into trucks, no understanding of the numbers or the industry. All right, Nancy, that's a pretty broad brush that you're using to make that stroke with. Not an accurate statement, not even close. There are a lot of those individuals that fall into that category, no doubt. But I do also think there are a lot of guys that are far more well-educated than they were, just a couple of years ago. And so that's good, right? If guys can make educated decisions, understand this, understand that there's a lot more to it than just running hard and getting paid and getting that revenue, right? I mean, when you say that, it just sounds so foolish to say. And when guys understand that, I think they have a lot better chance to make it successful. That's it. Cool. Let's kill this. Hey, man, thanks for jumping in. I hope you guys aren't one of those that are going to get hurt. Understand the lanes, know your costs, be really diligent about making right decisions over the next 6 weeks, because your wrong decisions can cost you a lot of money. Your right decisions can make you really good money, and the delta between those is really significant. So make right decisions, spend the time learning the lanes, learning the rates, positioning your truck where you want to be, and prepare yourself for that. All right, 2 more questions really quick. Thomas Wilson says, Scott, put in my 2 cents worth in this conversation. I've been in trucking all my life. I'm looking more and more at permanently retiring. I say full maintenance lease is the only way to go nowadays. And again, I'm not disagreeing with that. I just think everybody has a little unique, different situation depending on how long they want to run, how many miles they want to run, how long they want to own that truck for, what type of freight, where they live, just a bazillion different components that play a key role into what that right decision is. And again, I'm not disagreeing with you at all because we have full maintenance leases on some of our trucks.